So before we begin, I'd like to start by saying there is a little special announcement that'll be on its way, and it is on its way. For some reason, Amazon is still preparing the shipment. I ordered this box set plus a little extra bonus of two things, and one of these things will actually benefit you guys. And it's still preparing shipment. This was on July 29th, and it is now the 3rd, and it was actually supposed to arrive between today and the 8th, and it still hasn't even shipped yet. So we'll see. But with that out of the way, I want to talk about a few things. So, the failure of the gathering of the Juggalos. So, this came up. I know I talked about this in my previous video, which, by the way, I had no idea even uploaded. It said it was still processing, and it was at 0% for like 15 minutes. I'm like, fuck it. And I just closed out of it because it wasn't that big of a deal to me. So, I'm at the store, and I bump into these two guys. One had a Chaotic UK patch, and the other guy had a mohawk. And he made a joke. And then he saw my Hatchet Man tattoo. So he just completely tossed me to the wayside. Wouldn't even listen to what I had to say about my tattoo or anything until I bumped into him later on in the store, and he had said, and I had told him the story of my best friend Steve, what the music was then, and how it had already started to make its change into what it is today. And I told him about my channel, and I told him about how the Juggalo community changed, because it wasn't even a community when I was growing up. It was just me and four other guys, and those four other guys even hated me. Again, I got a neck for people hating me, which I consider to be a prize. And I consider it to be a talent of mine, to get under people's skin to where they will not like me. You are more apt to hating me than you will liking me, and that, I think, takes a lot of talent. So, with that said, let's talk about how the gathering of the Juggalos this year was a failure. First off, the grounds, from what I had heard. Second, the numbers are in. The actual number of the people who actually got the passes and actually attended the gathering without the people that had snuck in was 29,000 or 2,950. Those are the numbers. So 2,950 people at this year's gathering. That's a terrible number. So for it being a music gathering and a music festival, the thing that had also botched it was when music artists didn't show up and people ended up leaving early or getting arrested. That happened too. That happens a lot at festivals, I think. I don't know. I've never actually been to a festival except Warped Tour, which I don't consider a festival. Anyway, so you got the grounds, and you've got the fact that the whole thing with the gang label caused problems and friction in Ohio, and it's causing friction in other places. As a matter of fact, the whole gang thing went completely silent. The guy who did my tattoo, my germs tattoo, there, that one. He had actually said that, because of the reputation that we have now, we have, done ourselves into being called a gang. People, I think, in the new age need to start taking responsibility for what they have done. This generation of Juggalos is the equivalent of a millennial. So take the worst human being, the dumbest human being you can think of, and combine them with the label of a millennial, and then blend the two together, make them have a baby, and that is what we have. Because it's no longer just music to people, and that's where things fell apart. See, Child's Play Ninja had said that, he called them family kids and shit like that. That was when the whole gang thing came up. And there's two things I don't believe in. That's politics and coincidence and religion. But that, I think, is where it all started to, form a little bit, when there was, the Ten Commandments and whatever. And then there was people that were, doing this, Juggalo Justice group in California. And it just kind of lost control at that point. So when they're like, yeah, I'm not. Well, you might not be, but this person is. And with me having a Hatchman tattoo, and again, there's this whole thing where it's just because it didn't happen to you doesn't mean it's not happening to the person next door to you, blah, 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 blah. However, I feel like that there's a little bit more to that. It depends on your demographics, your area, what your Hobby Lobby sign looks like. If it looks like it's a ghetto, you got a Hatchman tattoo, they're going to combine the two. That's how small minds and simple minds work. And now with social media and everything else, police are also shit stupid as well and very cowardly, and they're cunts. So keep that in mind, that there is a war brewing, and it's with stupid people everywhere, cops included, especially cops, and this new age of juggalos, which everyone has bitched about, but nobody has called out. And for me to be at a gathering surrounded by those people, I remember when I said this story to you guys a shit ton of times. I was at the Palladium for the Mighty Death Pop show, and I was embarrassed to be standing there around those fucking people. Because that's not what it was like when I was at Hollow Wicked. There was people running around in costumes. I mean, sure, it was fucking Halloween. Who doesn't do that shit? And I'm talking to this one guy, and he's standing there. He's kind of cool. And this guy came up with the camera, and he pans over this way. It was cool shit. But then, that was in 2008. Now, fast forward to the Mighty Death Pop tour of Worcester, Massachusetts, which was May, I do believe, and it was completely different. Things were not the way they were on how I remember them being when I was at Hollow Wicked. I'm in the heart of it all. So there was that whole thing. When I called my boy Steve and I told him about what had happened to Death Pop, he said, "What was the highlight of that?" Though I said, "Kung Fu Vampire, hands down." I wasn't even up front for the fucking thing at Mighty Death Pop at all. I was actually up at the front for Hollow Wicked though. So again, the music changed, the scene changed, it's no longer the same. And for those of you hanging on to lyrics and saying, down with the clown lyrics and saying how that's like supposed to be true to life or whatever, go back and listen to the song Whoop Whoop from Twisted. And you tell me if lyrics mean anything to you, and you're going to say no. I was thinking about that the other day. I was listening to that song because it's one of my favorite songs from Twisted, and I got a kick out of it because I know that would really piss off the Juggalos if they'd actually thought back to that song. But they don't. But I digress. So, the way I see it is, intelligence has become the minority. Over at MNE has now become kind of the minority. And me, I am like the epitome of the minority. So, when all that broken down and pieced and whatever, the more you look at it, the more you realize that it was the new age people that came in right around the time of Bang Pow Boom. And I've pointed this out to people that if you look at my senior thesis that I did on the Sex Pistols, I noticed a trend that every 10 years there'd be like this new thing of punk rock, this new wave. Well, it is now 2017. That new wave is now happening. You had 76, you had 83, 84, 85, which then concluded in 86, and then in 88, 89, there was the pop punk birth. You had Green Day, and then you had Nirvana, which had pretty much caused the trend for all the whiny, mopey music. Contradict me all you want, question me all you want, you know it's true. And then you had in 96 the big boom. You had Casualties, you had Dropkick Murphys, Flogging Molly, Against All Authority between 95 and 96. And 96 was its own movement in general. And then you fast forward a little bit to 2005, 2006, where Restoration of Chaos and Order came out, where you had Punks Unite Leaders of Today. You had a lot of these albums coming up. The Briggs were coming up huge at that point. So there was like that old movement, right? And then you fast forward time, and tragedy struck with the cheap sex and all this other stuff. And then throughout that same banner of time, you had the whole Juggalo thing. Carnival Carnage, Dog Beats, it was like the beginning, the 17, whatever. And then you've had Ringmaster, then you had Riddlebox, which started drawing in its own crowd. Then you had Malenko, and then Juggle Brothers, which went platinum. And then you had the Wraith, when then the Juggalos had called them Wraithalos, but there wasn't a name for anybody prior to that. It was because it was around the 2003 time, and Messenger and all this other stuff had chat rooms, and that's when all these things had concluded and conducted and had stormed into this huge thing of name calling and putting a label on somebody as far as the Juggalo community goes. And then after that, it was Hell's Pit, and then the Calm, and then that's when the music started shifting and changing. After the Calm, you had the Tempest, and then years later, Bang Pow Boom, and then Mighty Death Pop. And so you can blame it on after Hell's Pit, that was the end of an era. And then towards Bang Pow Boom was the beginning of a new era. It was the second hand of the 6 Joker cards, so there's going to be 12 total. And then that carried on. And then Mighty Death Pop came out, people applauded it, Child's Play Ninja applauded it, and I thought it was absolute shit, and that was the time when Abominations came out. So those of you who don't know your music history, believe me, I know the history of music probably more than most do. I'm very educated, and I'm very lucky because I have a little bit of autism, so I'm really good at noticing patterns. It's one of the tricks to being autistic. You get to notice all these little precious little details, unlike most. So, as time goes on, things roll on and roll on. Not only did the generations of punk change, but people had changed in general. And you can attribute that to the estrogen in the water. You could attribute that to change in music, change in society, social media. Maybe it's just a change of people in general. But it went its natural order. After the hardcore movement, which was very, very short-lived, punk had pretty much changed, and then 96 boomed, and then it became something completely different. One of the things that I was told was, do not be at the St. Andrews Hall for a casualty show. People have been carried out on stretchers. It's not like that anymore, unfortunately. But that's where the music went wrong, and that's one of the reasons why the Gathering of the Juggalos failed, is because the old school dudes aren't going to shit like this. If they were, those numbers would have been doubled and tripled, because ICP has actually doubled in popularity. And that's because of the originals, the OGs, and then you've got the new age. But when MNE happened, and then there was that split, now you've got some of the OGs headed towards MNE. So, twisted shows and shit like that, for the small crowds, that's important to know because that's now back into the underground. Now, for those of you who are not catching on to my whole history in music, if you look at punk, dubstep, folk punk, heavy metal, it all started in the underground. And then all that stuff surfaced to the mainlining of the mainstream. And then as it dwindled down again, back into the underground, who listens to dubstep still? See my point? So it created this big boom, and then it had to go back down to the underground to make new work. So in order to keep it underground, like Child's Play Ninja had also mentioned, where, yeah, I keep it underground, well, that's because you don't have a choice. However, I appreciate the underground because that's where innovation comes in. That's where creativity comes in. Creativity does not come from Rise Records or any of those. It comes from the artist. And it sure as fuck does not come from Sony or any of that shit, or even Epitaph anymore. Now, music has gone even deeper than that. I remember in the booklet for Punks Unite Leaders of Today, there was this thing where it's like, start your own zine, start your own label, start your own band, written by the Casualties or whatever, kickstart your own thing. Don't wait for somebody else to do it. And that's been a huge battle cry in the punk era. And within the punk community, if you even want to call it a community, camp. Let's use camp because that's what everybody on YouTube likes to use, so we'll use camp. And the same thing with the whole MNE thing. We have to start something new. So when you do that, you're going to have less of a fan base because now you're transitioning and you're trying something different, which is why I said it was crucial to do an Abominations too. And with Guerrilla Voltage and stuff like that, you are now seeing metal, horrorcore, and punk, metal, all these different genres now accumulate, which is how punk originally started. It was a blend of blues, folk, R&B, and so basically think like all the kinds of music that you'd listen to in the 50s and the 60s, and they combined it all and made their own sound, but taking from the roots of these previous writers, these artists, whatever. And that's what ended up happening for the early punk stage. Now MNE is doing the same thing, which is why I am solely rooting for MNE. Now, I thought that was an interesting thesis to give you guys, because now it should make sense onto why the gatherings are starting to fail, because even though their record sales and their popularity and their notoriety has doubled, and even Violent J finally came out and admitted that yes, it is a publicity stunt, because they'll be able to get a new fan base for the cheap. Which is how the Sex Pistols did it. Really, the Insane Clown Posse is taken from the Sex Pistols. Because when the Sex Pistols came up and about and started their punk movement, it then became a thing. People walking around with bondage pants, people walking around with chokers, and then people were like piercing their cheek, safety pins in the ears, that kind of shit. And then in '79, it turned into Public Image Limited, and it didn't go quiet for those 2 or 3 years because in '79, in comes the Germs. In comes a lot of these bands that are starting to form and come up. And then you've got the mid 80s, the early to mid 80s, where hardcore and bands that were not featured on American Hardcore, like Circle Jerks. So really, the Insane Clown Posse is doing that same thing, which has already been done. But where MNE is concerned, that's where creativity comes in. So, that should answer your question. A little bit of history for you guys, a nice little lecture. The thing that's coming in, by the way, I might as well tell you, is a Dissent is Not Treason special edition book. So, we will make announcements with that. So make sure you subscribe to this channel, give this video a like, share it with your friends, and don't forget to like Sid Jones on Facebook, facebook.com/The Real Sid Jones, and the first letters are all capitalized. So, and don't forget to follow me on Twitter at Mount Swordfish, MT Swordfish. With that being said, my name is Sid Jones. I hope you enjoyed your history, and if you didn't, fuck what you think.